Hello and welcome to this week's Madaxeman podcast. This is number 53 in what's an increasingly lengthy series. And in this lengthy podcast as well, we've of course got all the usual gang. We've got all the usual features as well, including Andy's quiz and Andy's quiz music. But the main part of the podcast is made up of a discussion, a debate, a kind of chat around the vexed issue of pricing. Is it right? Why do wargamers get so obsessed with pricing? Is it the manufacturer's fault for underpricing things? Is there a link between pricing and quality? Why or how do people actually decide what's the right price to pay for their Wargames figures? So sit back, enjoy the podcast.
This means war. This means war.
Well, I think this is this 53?
Yep.
Anybody? Yes.
Yeah,
nods all
53.
round, and we just about scraped 7 people together. I'm not sure whether scraped is the right term. I'm not sure whether people is the right term. Dave, I think Dave's going to drop in and out due to doing that dangerous thing of upgrading your IT just before you need it and press the new version of operating system thing. But we're all here. We've got a full set of 7 this week. We're actually going to dive or chat around or try and talk this sort of vexed issue of, I guess it's 2 things really. It's like, why are wargamers so tight, or historical wargamers so tight, to be kind of the rude and blunt version of it, or possibly more articulately, how do we as historical wargamers attribute value to stuff, to little toy soldiers, and why do we work so hard for what are actually quite often very marginal gains in price? How do we attribute value? So we're going to have a good old chew around on that one. It's unusual. That's going to be us picking a topic and doing it first rather than just ripping it off from half a dozen other podcasts. But before we get to that world of excitement, it's our traditional, what have you been painting? Have you learnt anything? What's going on this week? So maybe looking kind of top right on my screen, because just in anticipation of the next round of the FA Cup, the draw for which has just been done, which there will be a Finkel Porter challenge with QPR losing at home to Fulham, I believe. Andy, what's been on your painting agenda this week?
Finished one lot of the Thracians, and I've undercoated the second lot, and I'm finishing off the Voynuk. So it's Voynuks and Thracians, and after that, then it's moving to little ships. Nothing too exciting to report. Okay. I did follow some of the basing guidelines from last week, and I think the basing came up quite nicely.
I think all your Thracians were historically, they've been done brown. Did you stick with that exciting colour scheme, or did you get inspired?
Well, no, only the hats. The hats were brown. The cloaks and tops and clothes were different shades of green, red, whatever.
Okay, so that's just cracking through some War and Empire figures, pretty much same as last time, and tiny little ships. Are they? Is there much of a paint job on those? Is it something that you have to get right to make them just not look like grey blobs, or is there?
Well, yes. I mean, especially as the Italians, you need to do the barbershop poles in a reasonably tidy fashion on the front of the ships.
Wow, how big is a ship to see the barber's pole?
I suppose it's about between 40 and 80 millimeters long, depending on what kind of ship it is.
Okay,
and
so that's
the barbershop thing was on the front of it to tell the Italian Navy, don't bomb us, bomb somebody else.
Just be clear to him, it was like the whole of the bow. It wasn't just a pole. They painted the whole, the deck of the bow. They painted in red and white stripes.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, to make them really visible to air attack from foreign.
Yeah. It wasn't like the whole of the deck was black with red and white stripe. Just about.
Well, I guess they were just working on the basis of guaranteed air superiority across the Mediterranean throughout the entire, theatre of war, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, if the Italian Air Force could have aimed their torpedoes or bombs properly, they'd been in serious trouble.
So does that mean they looked a bit like raspberry ripples?
Probably, yeah.
Looks really cool.
Looks really cool.
It's the main reason to buy an Italian fleet.
And which war is this? Is this first or second? Second World War. Okay. So can you see it from the bottom of La Spezia Harbour? Through how many feet of water?
Yeah, because you see the bubbles as the
You can still see the stripes from that then.
Yeah, okay. the pasta pops to the surface every so often when
Right. Okay. Right. Well, fascinating. We've learned something about history.
I never knew that.
Yeah. Well, let's carry on in that vein, and let's go to 2000 AD. Tamsin, after providing us with the YMCA-ing Donington Roman infantry last week, what is it yet more finishing off more of these people, little people for infamy?
Last Monday when we were recording, so there was something niggling at the back of my brain, and later on I worked out what it was. I'd painted the wrong shield designs on the Roman legionary and auxiliary.
I was going to say that.
So I went back and quickly repainted them to the correct shield designs to match in with the legionaries and auxiliaries I've done before.
Like Christmas design now.
Yeah, that does look very festive for the upcoming period. Okay.
What was wrong with the other one?
It's actually based on either British Reconnaissance Corps during World War II.
Okay, so they're not historical.
It's cat badge, but everybody called it the Christmas tree because that's what it ended up looking like.
Okay.
And after that, all I got done were the little bits of scattered terrain.
Wow,
I love that one.
Yeah, that looks really, really battered. And that skip is very good as well.
Yeah, skip. I'd painted it empty, and then I thought, actually, no, maybe I should fill it. So that ended up taking me a couple of days extra. Finished it today.
That looks absolutely superb.
Oh wow! So it's got rubble in it as well.
Yeah, added a load of rubble into it to make it up. And
how do you do the rust effect? Because that is superb. It looks
that looks like proper rust on a proper thing.
Mostly, the little bits of foam that you get in blister packs of figures.
Yeah.
Yep.
Or if you use the foam trays, the inserts which you pull out.
Yeah. Okay, spare sort of the blue foam.
That ripped up, dab it into paint, get off the excess, and then just stab it. I stipple it onto the bit. Starting dark, I think these started hull red, then went saddle brown, orange brown, and then one of I can't remember which orange.
So what it looks like you've done is bought a metal piece of scatter terrain, got it a bit wet, left it for a couple of years, and then there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, because these ones, I did a metal base coat, then I did rust effect, then I did what's known as the hairspray chipping technique. So
right, okay.
Cover up what you've previously painted with varnish, normally gloss. Let that dry, give it a coat of hairspray, and then it's easier with an airbrush, which I do have. Then you put on the airbrush on, or very carefully paint on a thin coat of whatever the top colour you want is. Let that dry, and then get a wet toothbrush or whatever, preferably not one that you're currently using for brushing your teeth.
Yep.
And sort of bash away at the top layer of paint to reveal sort of the underlayers of rust and bare metal.
Okay, so the thing is painted in rust to start with, then hairsprayed, then painted again, and then you sort of scratch off some of the paint, and it comes off in little kind of scabs, and then I guess you varnish it pretty quickly to stop more of it coming off.
Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay, so I've seen that technique, but I don't think I've ever had it explained as simply.
The alternative is, which if you haven't got an airbrush, you can just go do base colours, then do the dabbing with the sponge bits.
No, that looks fantastic.
How big is that skip, Tamsin, in terms of size?
It's about 5 centimetres long.
Okay. No, because I'm thinking that when I do my Greek temple army base, I might get a skip like that and try and put it next to it.
All of these were from war bases.
Okay.
Did you manage to get it in their sale, or?
No, I bought these. Actually, bought these ages ago.
Oh right, okay.
And they've just been sat around doing nothing.
Sat there for a while. Okay, good. Well, that's another bit of technique then that we've learned from you in this weekly podcast. Grand. Okay. So in terms of doing that kind of effect of different layers and paint chipping off and rust underneath, Adam, I guess it's lucky we've just learnt that before you started doing those 6 plastic stugs, you can use your bedside airbrush and whatever it is to add some of that sort of effect in a 10mm tank.
You know, that's exactly what I was just thinking, because I checked because the painting guide, and it's not a painting guide, I've decided, it's an account of an excellent painter, how they painted these models as well as they possibly could. That's not the same as a painting guide. You know, it's like a painting guide is teaching me how to improve my painting.
Yeah.
But after you said that there were 23 colours involved in painting your Sherman's green, I thought I would ever count how many colours was involved in painting the Stugs, that German 3-tone colour thing. So you had 23, yeah?
I think I had 23, yeah. And that was I think 5 of them were different whites because this was winter whitewash. But
okay, 23 to paint them green. To paint the 3-tone colour Germans, it's 21 colours.
21 colours, okay.
Yeah, so it's less.
Well, you know, that's one of those few things that the Germans did more efficiently in the war. You know, that they weren't over-engineered or something like that. I did actually start going down the dangerous route of should I get an airbrush to paint stripes on about 20 little tanks? But they appear to be like £100, and you need a compressor the size of my PC, and all sorts of other things. Or am I just making this all up?
No, you're not. What you're doing, what level of airbrushing that you're doing, you can get a very basic setup a lot cheaper.
I'd hope so.
No, you want the big toys.
But do you still need a compressor, or do you get a can of?
You need a compressor. You need to compress the cans.
Oh crap! They run out.
They end up. You'd end up spending a lot more buying cans of compressed air.
So I went through.
I don't think you know how little. I don't think you know how little airbrushing I actually plan to do.
I went through the same
brown stripes on tiny tanks. Yeah.
And the deal is, it's worth it if you want to get really good at painting toy soldiers. Because if you want to get really good at painting toy soldiers, you need to master how to use an airbrush. Because it allows you to do stuff that you couldn't do otherwise.
Yeah.
Does it matter what scale you're talking about, Adam? So would you say? I mean, I know you go now on 25mm rather than 15s.
Mm-hmm.
Would you be saying the same thing if you were painting mainly 15mm armies? Or do you think an airbrush is wasted on them?
But I don't know, because I think sort of like going into airbrush, you're more getting into the painting being your hobby rather than the war game playing. You know what I mean? It's like you're getting into the painting. So if you wanted to paint something really well, I would suggest that you perhaps wouldn't use 15mm. But as we've discovered with the 10mm Stugs, you could do as well. So it's like an airbrush.
I can see the logic of painting a vehicle with an airbrush, because that would have a uniform finish anyway. So you need to. It makes it good to look like that.
No, possibly.
It's one bit with an airbrush. It's not. It's so many things that you can use it for, and particularly this time of year, priming your figures, varnishing your figures.
Because you're obviously looking at different. Because I've been trying to look at them on Amazon and eBay, and I thought you were going to say, doing people's nails and doing nail patterns, because that seems to be the other thing which they're allowed to be used for. Yeah, repairing chips in cars, things like that. There's all sorts of uses.
So, for example, would you use it for basting your Christmas turkey or something like that?
Yeah, I think that's a different sort of compressor, isn't it? That's a different sort of compressor.
So if you want one, buy yourself an airbrush and a compressor, wrap it up, give it to Julie and say, give me that for Christmas.
Yeah, exactly. But it might even be kind of like still add up to more than I would normally spend on even myself at Christmas, which for something I'm just going to paint 2 lots of stripes with, I might try and do the other way.
For what you're looking at, you're possibly looking higher end brushes than you might need.
Yes, I think I would.
The Neo 3 Water should be about around.
The Neo 3 Otter.
Neo 4 Iwata.
4 Iwata. Okay, is that a Japanese battleship from the Second World War? Or back to Andy's painting now.
I think Iwata are a Japanese company, but
okay, all right.
Yeah, but how many bars?
Neo is made for them. It's not their own brand, but it
had 8 torpedo tubes.
It's a basic intro.
Right. I'll look for any water
You'll be able
then.
to get a fairly cheap eye compressor.
But what?
Online. You don't need a high grade studio one.
No, definitely not. But you're still looking. It's going to cost more than £100, isn't it? No, between the compressor and the airbrush. Peter's nodding.
I think, Tim, what you're saying is you've done a research project
on Amazon and eBay.
Yeah. So, okay, if we're not saying £100,
cheapo kit sets.
Yeah.
A hell of a lot cheaper than £100.
So it's 50 quid for a rubbishy one.
With
yeah.
You might have more problems with cleaning them and reliability.
I can imagine. Right. Okay. So I'll go click on Amazon after this one.
This means war.
Adam, what have you actually painted then this week?
Well, I finished off the Submersion Cavalry, which is quite good.
Okay.
I've done varnish today, although there was one really annoying thing, and it taught me a lesson in smugness. Because last week when we were talking about...
I can't imagine that you'd ever need a lesson in smugness.
He's an Arsenal fan.
Yeah.
We could take you out. I could take you outside. Right.
Yeah.
Because last week, it's like Peter was saying, but how do you stop it? Sort of like green stuff getting all over your box at the end of the competition with static grass, and other people saying, isn't it murder when you stick grass to your figures?
Yeah.
And I was there thinking, but when I've put the grass on, let it dry, and then I get a stiff brush, sort of like wipe it off, and then I sort of like brush down the figures as well, and I've never had either of those problems. And today I took the figures out to the garage. As soon as I stopped the varnish spray paint, put it down, I looked at the commander figure, and there was this clump of static grass on his coat and his cloak, and it's like,
yeah. And then you try and pick it off, and it scabs off the paint, and you've got to redo that. So
I basically scraped it off there and then, and paint came off as well. Yeah, and it was only on the cloak, so I've now redone the cloak. So it wasn't a disaster, but it's as soon as I put it down, I looked at the figure and just thought, how just So that was annoying, but on the plus side, they're done, and I've spent the rest of my time gluing together stations.
So those are now your, not summation, they're now your, however that German word is that sounds a bit like Schaugenfreude cataphracts or something like that. That's probably what they're going to need to be.
Schadenfreude.
Yeah, that'll be it then. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah. Okay. All right. So the stations are glued together. The summations are done. You're off and running.
They're being glued together. So yeah, things go forward. The only annoying thing was I was actually thinking, it's sort of like lockdown's over, so next week I can go back to entoyment. But it's like, no, you're not allowed to socialise outside your.
No, outside your magic bubble, are you? No, you can go shopping.
So I was thinking if I could get entoyment to sell me some food and a beer, but even then you're not allowed to.
No, didn't they?
Family thing.
Are you zone 2? Are you in tier 2 now, Adam?
Yep.
Oh, because it was tier 1 before the lockdown.
It was, but basically everywhere. But I think it's Cornwall and the Isle of Wight or something, isn't it? That's in tier.
Didn't I read today that a Scotch egg now counts as a substantial meal?
Scotch eggs.
The Tory minister said that, and I think other people will be saying, "Nah, bollocks." Yeah,
that's usually the case, isn't it? Yeah, it's something from probably one of those rebellious Tory MPs or something like that. Okay.
Which, funny enough, you quite often say to Tory ministers.
Yeah, that is
it was
true.
the Scots saying the Scotch egg, funnily enough.
Right. Okay. All right, Peter. Well, what's your you're also kind of sequestered at home. What's your painting? Have you managed to do any in amongst your coughing fits, or has it actually been kind of tough?
Yeah, I got the Bavarians out. I stuck them down, cleaned them up, but I've just been vacant possession. So I tried a couple of times launching off on it, but anything past the detail of I'm spraying it. That's as far as I can get at the moment.
Wow. So you're actually been proper knocked over by the dreaded Rocky then.
Yeah.
How are you feeling, mate?
Pretty rough. It's just like feel okay for a few hours, and then it just hits you like a wave. So, good news is I've slept more than I've ever done, but it's just a bit odd. You feel okay for a few hours, then it just knocks you out.
Wow. Well, look, if it's too bad for a wargamer to actually do any painting, although setting yourself barbarians is probably quite a big challenge. That's probably quite a technical paint job to give yourself. But other than that, stay rested, I think is the answer from all of us. In terms of other people who are about half awake, Saunders, how are you?
I haven't got COVID, thank God.
No. But what have you been up to?
Struggling with my IT, if we've discussed earlier.
Yep.
I've been just doing odds and sods, finishing things off. Stuck together some plastics. It's a bit more of the same as last week. I've been sticking together. Oh, where's the camera?
Oh, there it is. Yeah.
Deus Volti things, and because I'm researching doing it. I've never done a 28mm army. All my armies have been 50mm. So
that's a proper lockdown project. That is.
Yeah, so it's a sort of like contemplating all the various options and doing lots of research. And
what are you going to do then, Dave?
Well, I'm thinking my favourite medieval army is feudal or medieval Spanish. So I've been looking at what figures to get for that. So I think I've started off looking at the periplastics and things like that, and then
we might have a pricing review for you on that.
Yeah, we might be able to help you out on that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I've sort of started going to the expensive option and going with Crusader. So I've actually sent them an email yesterday saying, "Go on, give me your unit deals the way I want them."
Yeah.
We'll see what they come back with that. And but it seems they don't seem too bad. I mean, it seems to be about 140, 150 quid for a whole, for the army. So I didn't think that was too bad actually.
No, that would be reasonable. So has it really been a week of clicking on different websites and comparing models and pictures and prices and things like that, rather than a week of painting?
Yeah, it has. I mean, I'm sitting here painting off some, these Byzantines. It's been tidying up the table mainly, getting rid of projects before sort of launching into a big one for Christmas to keep myself occupied over Christmas.
So has there been anything that you've actually finished off then?
No.
Anything that you've made a dent in? Anything like that?
No, not really. No. It's just I'm sitting here I'm just doing the horses, the leather strapping on a load of horses at the moment, which is, as we've all said, is pretty boring.
Right. Is that the end of your Goths and Germans or something?
No, this is a spare bag of Heraclean Byzantine cavalry I ended up with. So I thought, we might as well finish them off.
That's ages since you did Byzantines, isn't it?
Yeah, but I bought all the options, if you know what I mean. So
right.
That was for a Justinian army, but I thought I'd have one extra bag of Heraclean cavalry, which is from a sort of slightly later period. So if I wanted them to be sort of guard or something like that. Okay. And they've been sitting around, and they're nice figures. So I'm just, fiddling with the horses for those, really. But I mean, I think one of the things this week has been sitting here researching Spanish military orders and
advanced retreat, form square, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, Calatrava or something like that, and also which knights I want for which, which I've been going through the WRG books, looking at Spanish military orders. I've been looking at the WRG book about which knights are which in which century, and getting all the research done and building a folder on the computer to say this is Spanish figures and things like that. Oh, and then doing Pinterest, going through Pinterest, looking at all the silly things on Pinterest.
Yeah, I guess there's a lot of Spanish heraldry on Pinterest for you to find.
So, Dave, have you actually looked behind the history of some of the Spanish military orders?
No, I'm struggling to find anything on this Spanish military orders.
There's a lot of it. There's a lot of it.
Where? Well, you have to tell me that.
It gets a bit weird and wonderful pretty fast.
That's what I'm hoping. Because that'll keep, if I can get my interest up, that'll sort of persuade me on the army.
There's even I think there was a military female order as well.
Is it the kind of thing you find on the dark web, and then someone from MI5 comes around and visits you?
Yeah. Or is this something in the Franco era, which I really am not so bothered
Not
about?
anymore.
Oh, right.
Just use the right VPN, I told you.
This means war. This means war.
Simon, what about you? Top left-hand corner. I think we've had a bit of conversation about buying stuff that I don't need as part of an order that you placed as well. But what have you been up to this week, painting wise?
Need, want.
Yeah.
Want.
Yeah, exactly.
So I've been busy painting this week, more stuff for Rampant Dragon. So I've now got a few more rats finished up, so starting to get there. There may have been a war base order to get some bases. Annoyingly, I missed their sale, so I didn't think of delaying the order. So missed out on saving £2. So damn it.
No, damn. £2. Disaster.
And then I painted up just something a bit different. So some of my old Renaissance figures that I'd stripped, I'd rebased and redone some of the older dragoons, which looked really horrible. So I moved the muskets into a tertiary unit, and then reuse the mounted dragoons to make some mounted arquebus guys. So I've got something really obvious. Guys with horse and pistol is Cuirassier. Guy with big carbine is obviously a writer. Just makes things a bit more obvious.
Mm.
So
I think I think I saw a few people online this week were looking at the AGLG or dabbling on the AGLGR thing on Facebook as well. There's a couple of people asking about basing and things like that. So potentially you've been able to chip in and give them some advice on that.
Yeah, we added a few comments into it because Andy and I had a game last week on Tabletop Simulator. We had a game of Italian Wars. So Italian city-states versus Maximilian Imperial Germans. So the good old-fashioned slugfest. Germans on the northern cities. There were Kiels, gendarmes everywhere, and the Germans won the game. But we're going to allow Milan to remain an independent state, fully in their own control, their own borders.
Right.
And you've communicated this decision from the far side of the Alps, which you crossed in great haste. Is that right?
There was a special on at the local Aldi, and for beer, so we had to go and get there.
Yeah, rush back. So they were fleeing in fear.
being escorted by my knights poking you with their swords.
It went horribly wrong. It was great.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I imagine so. All right. So I think from my point of view, I nearly got to the end of these damned Arab spearmen. I've done the basing on them now. Got the static grass on it, got the flock on it, got them all sanded and inked and all the rest of it. So I've now got 6 blocks of double rank spearmen who are just waiting for the right day to do matte varnishing. But I'm really in kind of two minds because the weather's sort of cold and damp, but isn't super cold all the time. It's kind of hovering around about 10 degrees, which is kind of on
a bit less than that today.
Yeah, it's a bit less than that today, but it sort of warms up a bit. But I can't quite work out when's the time to rush out and try and do some matte varnishing outside, because I'm still kind of very, very fearful of fogging. Although, Tamsin, I do still remember your tip of making sure that the varnish tin is actually warm, the spray tin is warm, being kind of the magic ingredient there. So I'm probably more confident on that. And then I've done up a couple of units of javelin men with some lovely Perry figures from the Arabs as well, all still very colourful. And then as I was doing that, I've gradually been ordering odds and sods from different places in 10mm in this kind of ongoing change my pre-airbrush purchase 10mm World War II stuff. And I kind of got sidetracked into doing a rebasing exercise. And I've rebased what's that, 15 times 5. I've rebased and some other, about 80 or 90 10mm Americans into a new basing scheme that I've done because I was making some bases for the tanks that I will use once the tanks are sprayed and finished and assembled. And I just kind of was on a bit of a roll with basing technique. Maybe I was actually listening last week or when we were talking and got kind of a bit inspired on it. So I've been doing more basing than painting probably this week, but it's one of those things that you achieve something with. I think it's one of the things we said last week. You feel like, ta-da, suddenly I've got a whole new little army, which then did prompt another order of bases from War Bases, which I did manage to get in before their sale. I think there's another couple of different bits of sales. I think one I missed, but there's another one I might have snuck in on as well. And then Pendragon have come out with a 10mm siege tower that it turns out is about 35mm wide. So, and it's in MDF and it's only about $5. So I bought 2 of those to try and turn them into Cyrus's mobile towers for the early Achaemenid Persians, because that's always a bit of a hoot as well.
That's worth knowing, especially if I
I should, hopefully they should come quite soon, and I can see if I've wasted my money, if there's actually room at the top to fit 2 or 3 15mm archers. But looking at those things, they were just archery platforms above the battlefield. So even fitting in, you can fit in 2 or 3 people in the top of an elephant howdah in 15mm. So on the top of a siege tower that's like 35-40mm square at the base, there's surely got to be room for 2 or 3 archers or 3 or 4 archers in at the top of it. So that will be interesting to see when that comes in a week's time. Maybe I'll paint it up in a kind of rusty way, copy the skip option for it. But yeah, that's really been my week of painting. Nothing too dramatic, just a few bits of upgrading and actually probably more basing than painting, I suspect.
Question for you, Tim. You've been talking about upgrading your 10mm. Got an email from Victrix saying, hooray, our German half-tracks have now been released.
I saw that.
Would you be tempted?
No, because I've got the half-tracks from Red 3, which are metal ones, which are still only £3 something each anyway, and are really nice. And they're, that thing you banged on about last week about overcomplicated versus simple, theirs are really, really simple, really clean, solid castings with sides that I think I can put stickers on and will paint up quite neatly. And the crew are kind of neat. So actually I'm like, no, these are, for me, these are better for what I want to achieve after you persuaded me of that last week.
Mm-hmm. They're the ones you got the little guys sitting in the back.
Yeah, the guy sitting in the back, and then the drop-in, kind of unit for
mortars or whatever,
the sort of support options or something like that.
Yeah,
so
I'd be tempted to get some. I'd be tempted to get about 3 of them with guys sitting in the back, because that would be a complete battalion in Rommel rules.
Yeah, well, Red 3 just released their engineer vehicle as well, which they hadn't done when I put in the last order. So maybe that's something we need to take offline and look if there's a kind of combined order so that I can pick up, because you've got to have 2 of the engineer ones as well. Certainly in Blitzkrieg Commander, whenever you always need the bloody engineers to go and knock holes in other people's wire and bunkers and all that kind of stuff. So you need the 2517s to carry your engineers around. So so maybe that's another thing for next week's order before all these places shut down for Christmas.
Yeah.
Cool. Did anybody do any gaming this? Well, we talked a bit about one game. Did anybody else do any?
We did some BE.
We did BE last night.
Okay.
3 of us.
Let's talk about that then. Let's talk about that then. I'll wind us into that then. This is the thing. So look, that was what we painted. I think this week we've already mentioned a game which took place between Simon and Andy, in which Simon took a 2nd place victory by the sounds of it. But I think Peter, Dave, and Andy, you had another run through of Battle Empire this week as well, or earlier this week, with your play it slowly, learn the rules, and see if Dave can not get beaten by trying to advance in column against mass guns across a road and a bridge.
Well, I did much better this week.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, we had a game at the start of the week, didn't we, Dave? Before I got totally whacked out.
Yeah, that was interesting. The Austrians kind of went straight through the French
Aha.
Which
Right.
I mean, there's some interesting things in there.
I thought it was supposed to be historical. These rules.
Yeah, well, there's a lot more Austrians than there are French, because the
It
Austrians
boils
are a lot
down to the
cheaper.
generalship.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There was the skill factor was definitely there, and I would say there was a bit of dicing. But I think the one thing we discovered in that game, Pete, I think you'd agree, is that Jaegers with rifles are really, really good.
Oh God, yeah. So
they shoot further, they shoot better, they shoot everything. You know.
Yeah, it was basically working out about the rules and how effective some of the shooting can be, and what the impact is, because the Austrians rock up with large units. So it all starts adding into the factor that it's the old adage of, if you can concentrate firepower, it starts being pretty lethal, especially with opening up a bit with some softening up and then going in.
Well, that's right. I mean, that is the key, I think, in Napoleonic, is to, a lot of charges happened and things where the enemy wasn't softened up and they tended to go wonky. And the difficulty was trying to coordinate the softening up with the charges, which a lot of the time didn't work properly. And that led to a number of defeats. But I mean, like our game last night, for example, just shows what happens when you're charging without softening up.
Yeah.
No, I just throw this in on BE, because the first game I had, I thought, right, I'm going to try a grand battery, which was only 2 batteries together, because it's that scale of game. It's not an army level game. And kind of realised that I put the 2 guns together and kind of realised quite quickly that the extra bonus you get for shooting both batteries at the same unit is nowhere near as good as shooting each, sort of having 2 batteries each shooting at different units, which made me think, well, everything I've taught about, sort of being taught about concentration of fire, that seems a little bit, or was I just doing it wrong? I don't know, that struck me as a bit
But the batteries themselves are a concentration of fire, so you're basically doubling down on something that's already concentrated. So when we say concentration of fire, it's more the support factors. So if you're going in and you've got one unit, I was basically having 3 units facing up against one of Dave's. So I had a particularly good shooting unit, then having some other stuff around it. So with those factors, you're actually causing a fair bit of damage if you do a half-decent dice roll. With the cannons and everything else, they're really effective when you're actually either doing to canister or someone's turning up with several waves, because it's the ricochet effect, which we also saw on one of Dave's games, where, Tim, you were watching that one with the ricochet going across and almost taking out his general, which was most amusing. So learning about the ricochet rules, it's just very, very different from ADLG. I'm enjoying it.
The more we're playing, the more questions crop up about supports, hard flanks, things like that. I think there's an awful lot of subtleties there, which I think it's quite a project to learn these rules inside out.
But though you're saying those things about subtleties, they do sound like they are you guys learning Napoleonic tactics and the rules force you to do that.
Yeah.
Is that the sensation you get?
Yeah.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, I've had to go. I'm sitting here reading this book of Napoleon on the Danube, Thunder on the Danube, because, to be honest, I'm realising I know nothing about Napoleonics really. So I'm reading some sort of hardcore history books.
What is that? The one about them advancing in cannons over bridges and getting absolutely slaughtered, Dave?
Yeah, there's a bit of that going on. In fact, I'm at the siege of something Ragnarburg or something like that, where he's had a grand battery and he's demolished the walls and demolished a tower.
It's where the Frenchmen held out for about 3 days and screwed up an entire Austrian corps.
Yeah, no, this is after that. They've been found in the rubble of the town and rescued by Napoleon, who says, "Why the fuck are you here? Prisoners, where's the rest of your regiment? You've all been marched off across the Danube." And the officer
is that Napoleon played by Vin Diesel then?
Yeah. No, Napoleon's been hit by a spent musket ball and got a bruised foot. So he's had to ride out in front of his whole army to prove he's not dead. It got cheered like in the film of Waterloo. No, but anyway, so he's got into the town. He's rescued these officers from this regiment who were left all on their tods to hold this city.
Yeah, 65th, I think, from memory.
Yeah, they've all been captured by the Austrians. The soldiers have already been marched off as POWs. the officers have been left in the town and given their word of honour not to fight
parole,
in the war again. They've got parole. So the officer in charge has been scolded by Napoleon, and he's rushed off and come back with this eagle, which he's wrapped inside 2 Austrian battle flags and hidden. And Napoleon's gone, oh, well, you're really cool after all. So it's fun. It's a good laugh.
Okay. So you're learning the tactics bit by bit and learning that it's just not an ancient game.
I think if we were back at the club and around the table and had 4 or 5 of us playing around, moving stuff around, we would be picking it up a lot faster, a lot more easily. It's hard on tabletop sometimes, just getting the concept across. It's hard having that chat over the phone as opposed to just around the table makes it a little bit harder. But at the moment we've got the time, so we're using it wisely. I think it's one of those. As soon as we start playing it in anger and getting the initial setup and everything else, we're going to go a lot faster. Then the depth will be coming in even more with the when you have units retire back and get them back in, rallying up different units and such like.
Yeah, it sounds it sounds and it looks, the bits I've done, I do need to sit in on more of these games. It just obviously is. It's a very different pacing. It's not anything like.
You've got to have a different mindset to playing ADLG to playing Napoleonic.
Totally different mindset,
yeah. Andy learnt how much joyful cavalry are going up against infantry.
Yeah.
Without supported.
Yeah, that's right.
The power of the gun.
Throwing cavalry into supported infantry is not a clever thing to do.
Yeah, no, even if they're not that was within my skill set to know that already, I think.
Yeah.
Even
but I had an amusing incident in a game I played on Wednesday against Dave Ray. He was... we were doing Romans against Macedonians, and his Roman elite legion decided to turn around and move backward to try and drag lure me forward. Unfortunately for him, he moved some skirmishers forward to cover the legions. I then charged the skirmishers who evaded, but I rolled along, and that whacked my pikes into the back of the legion, which wasn't too nice for them. It was quite entertaining.
Oh, cool.
Schoolboy error.
Sounds grim. Sounds tricky. Okay. Well, on that note, then I think that probably wraps up our review of games played this week.
This means war.
Well, look, this is us about to attempt having a proper discussion about something almost serious. I think it's something that we all talk about in passing and with various elements of knowing winks and all the rest of it throughout when we're doing this. And we are sat here as people who've just done the best part of 30 weeks of shopping and painting and online ordering for figures, which it may still well be another 6 months before we're even able to get on the table against anyone else. And we're all sat here with probably quite significant collections of stuff that are sat in cupboards and all around us, some of which I would guess actually probably a decent proportion of it may never have made it onto the tabletop, and some of it may well not do. And I think the topic really of the day is, I'm just trying to think even the best way to articulate it really. It's that particularly historical wargamers thing, and I say that specifically about historical wargamers, a kind of slightly more than feels sensible or right obsession with pricing and value and cost and how much individual figures cost, and with that kind of a massive excitement about any sort of discount. It's why the Black Friday sale of 10% off something can suddenly make everybody desperately excited. And I think there's, to kind of give it a bit of context, there's a few different bits about this. And I think to start with, we're not talking about, can you afford this? I think there is an implicit assumption here that this is, if we're actually really honest, if you are buying what you're playing with, this isn't a massively expensive hobby. You've compared to, I don't know, I'm not sure any of us are golf. Mountain
golf is the best one.
Buying a bike or any of these other things that people do, or going away, following football teams, watching rugby, all these other things. It's not a massively expensive hobby to buy a decent amount of stuff, probably more than you can paint in any normal year. You get enormous amounts of time spent painting it, which is part of the hobby. It's actually a good cost-effective hobby to do that if you can buy the stuff that you actually want. But within that, within that context, given that this is affordable, you buy 100 figures and you could spend 2-3 weeks painting them up, as we've all done over the last 20 30 weeks or 40 weeks or however long, 17 years of lockdown that's going on. Yet there's still that thing of, are these a few pence more than the other ones, or is this a bargain, or are these good value? And there seems to be quite often a question about value versus quality, and given quality subjective as well, that we all seem to get very, very tied up in knots on. And then there's a question about the cost of an individual figure being more or less expensive, when certainly for the games that we play, and even the more contemporary games, we've had a discussion about small size army games, the sagas, the things that are 50-60 figures or whatever, or Infamy or a bit more, and even ADLG as a 15mm game is 100-120 figures, something like that, which isn't enormous amounts. You're picking up an army for 50 or 60 quid. So the kind of question is, why do we all get so obsessed with pricing? And I think there's a flip side about it. Is why is pricing of some of these things so weirdly inconsistent? Is it the manufacturers missing a trick, leading us down it? Is it something in the psychology of being a wargamer? But I don't know. Who wants to kick us off with some thoughts on this one? Andy, do you want to?
Yeah,
do you want to start?
Yeah, I think first of all, it's your willingness to pay a price for something depends on, is it something you, inverted commas, needs, in the sense of it's a project you definitely want to get into, or is it something you come across casually, like at a show or browsing the internet, and think, oh, they look nice, shall I bother? If it's a project you want to do, for example, you've got a definite project of redoing your 10mm World War II Germans, right? So because that's something you definitely want to do, you're more likely to say, well, I see these guys, they're a bit more than I'd necessarily want to pay, but it's a project I definitely want to do, so I'm more prepared to pay it, rather than if you weren't redoing your 10mm Germans and you saw those things on a website, you saw, I'm just saying is your degree of purpose makes a difference to what you're prepared to pay.
Now, I wonder, and I don't know what anybody else thinks, I'd almost, that sounds like it should make sense. But if I try and think of my own behavior, I actually wonder if it's almost closer to being the opposite, because the fact that I've decided to replace or redo some of this 10mm stuff has drawn me into almost a parallel hobby of trying to look at all the different manufacturers and deciding what I'm prepared to pay, and what is good value. Whereas if I turn around here, I'm not looking at the Zoom background that I've got here, but actually my actual real room, there's still a copy of Black Seas sat there on the shelf, completely unstarted, that I'm trying to think, I think maybe it was it 50-60 quid? I've got because there's no context about that. Wasn't something I particularly was planning to do. It's like, that looks fun, bugger it, I'll chuck 50 quid at that.
But is there a sweet spot in that sort of? It's like what came through a lot of the Kickstarters. A lot of the Kickstarters were based around that sort of like 50 under £100 sweet spot. Warlord Games done a lot of it, where it's like it's almost like, well, it's less than a couple of prices of go to the movies now and everything else. It's equivalent of a couple of bottles of wine sort of thing, and it's like I can afford to throw that away. Whereas when you start looking at an army, you start looking at it, as Dave was saying early, and looking about all the different connotations of it and everything else, and that makes it a bigger project in itself. Even though, as you say, the cold start reality of it, you're only talking like 120 odd figures. If you looked away from that, it's not actually as big an investment as you think it is. It's just, it feels a lot larger because of the time, effort, and mental ability that you put into it compared to getting a box game, which is almost like a compulsion buy. So it's different ways you're actually looking at it, and different ways the psyche actually looks at it.
Why would I spend loads of time and effort to make a workout or engineer a saving on an army that, in inverted commas, I want, that the best that saving could ever be, if I just went and picked any old figures and picked the most expensive, it still would be less than 50 quid difference in anything.
But you don't actually look at that at the time. You start looking at the individual figures, and you look at the you go on the website, you see, oh well, that's really expensive. You look at it from that cold light of day, but you don't actually often sit at it and actually do the totting up and saying, well, is there really that big expenses? And like you say, I think this is the key point. If you were to do that, you'd go, well, what's the stress? I'll just buy the ones that I actually like, because I'm going to be looking at them all the time. Am I willing to actually look at the difference? And I ended up doing that because I looked at some of the new Donington ones, the Legio Heroica, and I did that with Damien. I got an army for one of my sons, and it's just, they look nice. Okay, they were a bit more than a couple of other manufacturers. I could have gone cheap and just done it because, and I was like, no, Damien was great. It was at Reading. He ran through everything, in his usual inevitable style. He's fantastic with it, explaining it to my son and everything else. Just bought an army. It's like, why not? They look good. They look damn good. They help me with my painting.
But is that you turning that purchase into a purchase that you choose to feel good about? Whereas, Andy, the thing that you said about planning an army that you need, in inverted commas, this ridiculous word, you need, if it becomes something you need, does it then become something that you feel obliged to work to get it at the cheapest thing? Whereas Peter,
no, I think
the way you describe that,
if it's something, if there's something you need, as opposed to you don't mind whether you have or not, you're more inclined to say, well, if it costs a bit more because it's something I definitely want, I'm more prepared to pay it. Now, to give an example, I wanted a few units of Viking infantry. I was buying some paints from Ian Marsh, and he had some packs of Camelot Vikings. So I thought, okay, I'll buy them. Now they've arrived. I've got the Thracians I'm painting on Camelot. They're quite reasonable figures. These Vikings look like the Irish Vikings breeded with leprechauns. They're a bit small. And whereas sculpturally, they're not bad. Size-wise, they're a bit small. And instinctively, I don't think they'd go well with my other the rest of my Viking army, and I'm not sure I'd even ever use them.
So I don't class any of the wargaming stuff as need, just want, and as it's all discretionary spend at the end of the day. Is it?
No. Sorry. I've got a question on that. No. Damien, I remember Damien, because we're quite a few of us hit on this podcast, the competition wargamers. And I remember Damien from Donington saying to me, I went over to see him after, so we were at a competition weekend. And after the first game on Saturday morning, Damien says there's always a rush of people who come over to him. And they've obviously been beaten in their first game. And they come up and go, I need bags of javelin. I need, because obviously they've just been thrashed by somebody who's got a troop type that they know nothing about. So there is a need thing in that going on, I think.
Oh, that's a good one.
That's a very good one, yeah.
Is that people convincing themselves that it's a need because they're embarrassed with the fact it is discretionary spend? Because
I think it's just, as Dave said, it's just people have worked out that somebody else has worked out different troop types better, and they think I need that in my army to be able to win.
Yeah, there's a thing of what I tend to do.
Also, throw in another reason why it's a need. Playing and painting toy soldiers is what I do to relax. It's what I do to escape from the stresses of the world and my life. Because once I've got a paintbrush in my hand and I'm looking at the tip of the paintbrush, the rest of the world disappears. So I think there is a need there. For a lot of people, I would put that down as a need. It's part of my life. The that it's not
Definitely.
an important part of my life. I don't rate it anywhere near as important as my children, for instance. But for seeing me through the year, it's actually quite important.
But that's about saying you always need a conveyor belt of stuff to do, but if you're saying I need a conveyor belt of stuff to do to keep myself busy, to distract me from the real world, the rest of it, the question then is, why do we all or so often get drawn into, Dave, you've just spent a few days looking at different pricing. I've been doing this with this 10mm stuff, getting hooked up on the price difference of, I'm buying something, I want to enjoy painting it, I'm gonna own it after it's done, but how do I make that decision between the 20, 30, 50 different manufacturers in some of these periods that I could choose from? How do I make that decision, and where does price come into it?
Where I'm concerned, I mean, I'm a purely historical wargaming competition wargamer. So my concept of, and I kind of started 10 years ago. So my concept of need has always been, I've got to get a collection of medieval figures which are all completely interchangeable. I studied ancient history at university, so I have a different need possibly to others, because I really like to research it. And I think I get my kicks, and I go with Adam on that one. I think sitting here painting it's like being a carpenter. You sit there and you do it, and it distracts your mind because it's an action thing. You're not sitting there consciously going, oh, bloody hell, I don't know if I've painted that right. You just get on and do it. For me, it's the historic, if I've got an army, so Napoleonics, a long time ago, I sat down with everybody and said, who makes the best Napoleonics? And I went for AB Miniatures. Because, and they are a damn sight more expensive than other people's figures, but they're beautiful. They're beautiful and they're great to paint, and you get a lot more satisfaction out of them. And that leads on. I mean, at the end of the day,
actually, can I just stop you? You say you chose AB and you get a lot more satisfaction out of them because they're such good figures. Do you own any other figures from any other manufacturers?
No.
So yeah, what you're saying there is that, and it's very good. AB is a great example. They're pricey, but they are pretty universally recognized as the best 15/18mm Napoleonics, and you don't get much. You don't get much pushback from that. You put any group of wargamers in a sweaty pub, give them a load of Scotch eggs, and they're going to tell you that they're going to come to the conclusion of AB, whereas other things. But you've internalized that, or you've made that decision that they are worth paying for. But anybody you ask, all the other six of us would say, yeah, they're worth paying for. We'd all nod, and you'd feel good about it. But if you move into other things, getting that, where does value come, because you get into a much more subjective thing. We've talked a lot about Forged in Battle because they've had the Kickstarter and a lot of people have bought it, and I've got some very nice Forged in Battle figures, and I've got some Persian cavalry that are just meh. And
I think they're early figures.
And I sit them next to Zeiston cavalry, which are more expensive, and I go, there's no comparison here. This is clearly value.
But the value in the Forged in Battle for me was because I'd never done Ancients before. I was a newbie in it. It was perfect for me to actually build up some armies and build up some different types of armies. So I got the value from that it was a very, very easy way in to actually, it came on just the right time, just started playing ADLG. I'd got one army at that point. I'd got Romans that were the old Corvus Bell, and it was just perfect. So I could just get several armies. They looked more animated than anything else.
Yep.
I know you're saying there's Eistons and everything else, but it was just an easy way in for me.
Yeah.
And a lot of people were just getting into ADLG. So and a couple other work systems. So it just seems to come along at the right time. So the value from that was more being able to get lead on the table. And as I think Dave and Simon just quote it a few times, war game ready, that 3 foot rule, which, there's several people around this who are a hell of a lot better painters than me. So for me, if a figure's good enough that I can actually put the paint on it and do it justice, I mean, AB are fantastic. They even make my painting look good. But, I don't want to go to the other extreme on some other manufacturers where I'd have to be Townsend level of painting to actually make them look good. I'm not, it's basically a sow's ear out to, silk purse out of sow's ear sort of thing.
What you're talking about there is almost kind of the sort of attitude to price and figure price that you would apply to other things in the real world as well. Again, right, this is simple, it's straightforward. They made it very easy for me to buy. It's all consistent. Bosh, I can do it, and then I don't have to think about it anymore. Yet there are, certainly if we think down the club or you look online, there's wargamers who are very, very, very focused on price of individual figures. And I think, if you think of when about which is good, which is bad, what's good value, and we've all talked about piling in on Kickstarters or Black Friday sales or this is cheap, and trying to be clever with the Victrix discount to try and test some stuff out and things like that. What's the difference, I think, between you going with a kind of almost a mature attitude of, I need to get started on this. This is all off the shelf. I'm almost don't need I'm happy because I don't have to deal with the complexity of looking at loads of different manufacturers for the best stuff. Yeah, I think Simon, you and me have been having a sidebar conversation about Ottoman Turks and just looking at different manufacturers for get some Ottoman Turkish Sipahis and cavalry. I think, Dave, we've had a long conversation before about who does the best Ottoman janissaries and things like that. Yeah. But you get, once you start going, actually, I only need a certain amount of them, and I'm trying to pick from 20 different manufacturers, price suddenly becomes into it, and you go, "Ooh, is that better than this one?" How do you actually make a judgment between 2 different manufacturers when how much of that judgment is about price?
So I've just bought a Ottoman Turk army for Renaissance. Didn't need it, but wanted it.
Yep.
And being a good diligent wargamer, I looked at all the vendors on the market.
Of course.
Comparison with a spreadsheet on price per figure, quality, shipping, time for delivery, and all of that.
Yeah.
Because you have to do this very scientifically.
Yeah.
Did you do a spreadsheet for all this?
Absolutely.
Jesus.
So there's the spreadsheet with the filters, and worked out how many figures per battle group I need, how many base I need, how many extras I'd have. Could I make them things you do when you've got you're stuck at home for 24 hours a day. But it's funny how you do tear yourself apart from you looking at discounts or whatever, or just different price points. And as you said, sometimes you're talking really just the difference of £10.
Yeah.
So I was comparing. So we always use Essex Miniatures as the baseline
benchmark.
They're like the basic base price. Can you get better or lower quality and better price or lower price than them, or high price? So I looked at Legia Heroica. Some of the models really, really nice. Pricing a bit expensive. Some of the models were a bit meh. And then looking at other brands as well, or models like Lancashire Miniatures, who've got the
Venexia, yeah,
who look really, really nice. Some of them models
they are good, and they're cheap.
Sorry.
And they're very cheap at the moment.
There you go, Dave. You're chipping in with the cheap thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I know exactly. I looked at them on the Venexia website and went, "Oh, well, they're £2.50 instead of £4.50," and I was like, "Oh, I could do it if you want the basis of my horse."
Yeah.
20% off is always good. But it was
so
funny.
He knocks his camera over.
Yeah. So excited. Yeah.
Whoosh.
Yep.
But it is funny how you do tear yourself apart when you're doing an army of an ADLG. So we normally think of an army's about 130 quid, give or take, because you always buy a few extras. Other than
wow, that's a big cost. Yeah.
Yeah, because I would think I like to do a 300-point
everything, right? Everything.
Have all the extra baggage and stuff like that. And other than the big discounts once a year, you can normally get 5 or 10% off. So you might be talking 5 or 10 quid, so a few pints.
So when you did that, you talked, it might be £10 different. When you did that big spreadsheet with Essex sit in the middle they've got a price, they've got the quality. The quality question is, are they better or worse than Essex? You've got some sort of weird mathematical formula. You've spent longer working out what to buy than you will ever do playing them, all that kind of thing. How much did price play into whoever you ended up actually choosing in the end? Did you buy a less good set of figures than you might have wanted because they were better value?
I think so. So in the end, I went for a combination of QRF miniatures and Lancashire because they were 20% off. I could have gone for the Kurasan ones or whoever because they were slightly nicer. But they would take a lot longer to get out here from delivery and all that, price and all the other stuff. But a lot of times it comes down to, is the army going to be a feature piece army?
Right.
Or is it going to be a playable army?
Okay.
So
are they gaming pieces or are they things you're proud of? Yeah.
So the idea is, like say Dave was saying about his Napoleonics. So he's bought AV miniatures because they are the top tier miniature. For my Napoleonics, I went for Lancashire.
They're gaming pieces.
They're gaming pieces. And so for me, it's all about, can I paint the army at the 3-foot rule, get the toys on the table reasonably quickly, and push toys around? If I can do that cost effectively, that wins it for me. And I'd rather spend the money on 1 or 2 nicer figures like we often do for ADLG.
So,
Simon, 25-year general as the big general. And then...
I think you've hit the nail on the head about being
we'll come to Tamsin because she must have a different view on individual figures. But Peter, chip in about the army piece, and Tamsin will then come to you.
Sorry to just to jump in. I know what you mean. It's like I've done the thing to get the armies on the table because I haven't been particularly vested on certain ones. But it's when you are vested in that one army, like I did with I made the mistake of. For my anniversary, we went and travelled around Europe, my wife and I, and looked at a couple of things in Austria, Hungary, etc., etc. And then we start looking at Napoleonics, and I've seen all these actual Napoleonic paintings and beautiful halls and everything else. So therefore, I felt I had to do it justice. It's the same with certain other armies.
Sorry, Pete, can I just check that? For your anniversary, you took your wife on a romantic tour of Napoleonic battlefields. Is that what you're saying?
No, not Napoleonic battlefields. It just happened to be in Vienna. You go wandering around Vienna, you can't not see some of the history and everything else if you've ever been. Same with Hungary. It's there in front of you with the castle and everything else. Even I'm not that disastrous. But basically, you start being a bit more vested and you want to put those ideas, and you've done that little bit of research. Like Dave was saying earlier, he's already reading about the Spanish Knights because he loves doing the medieval Spanish army. So he'll end up buying a few extra figures or classical figures. Whereas when I wanted to do a Chinese army, I went with Essex and I got a couple of guys who were on the call to advise me. And I just got all the standard figures because I just fancied trying it out and just in a bog standard Chinese army for ADLG.
Okay, so there's a difference there between something where you want gaming pieces, where price is an issue, but then there's a different class of figure where you go, I want to invest time and make the painting and making of this a thing. So then the price doesn't really matter quite as much, even though you still do the same research. So Tamsin, kind of coming to you because you paint on different scale, a different number of figures, sometimes to us banging out the old 15mm ADLG army for 60, 70 quid or whatever.
Yeah, I still do bang out an ADLG army.
Yeah.
I think there's saying, is it all historical gamers that have?
I think it's a thing that's.
I don't think it is. I think you might see it more among competition gamers, because you want an army that can cover this theme, this theme, this theme, this theme, this theme. So they'll have multiple armies, whereas non-competition gamers might have one or two armies. So they're possibly less likely to look for the cheap options. If you're a competition gamer, yeah, you might want some nice looking figures. If it's an army you're interested in, if it's an army that it's just so you can play in that theme in a competition, then you probably will just look for the cheaper gaming piece figures and save money.
But even if you're doing that, though, going back to Simon's point, the difference for an army between the best figures you can choose and these are gaming pieces might be 20 quid tops.
And I think when I do my
I think you might be looking more than that. I think cheapest figures. So you sort of Lancashire Games, Peter Pig, 30p a figure. Some of the other, I just thinking, Donington New Era, you're talking 60p a foot figure.
Well, look, let's pop my spreadsheet of doom on.
But when I'm buying an army, one of the things that I look at, price, a variety of figures, which can be important. If you want a variety of poses available, but also the pack sizes. Pack content. So one reason I went Donington for my 30 Years War era armies was, it was individual figures, so I could get what I wanted and I could get a variety of poses within units. I probably cost me more than going sort of Old Glory 15s, but the pack sizes there would have been a nightmare to get the figure. I'd have had loads of spare figures.
This means war.
If we look here, I've got this spreadsheet on screen here that we'll link to or something. And this is just doing a quick scan through of some of the different mainstream 15mm manufacturers and how much a figure costs. I've doing the textbook counting mounted as 2 and infantry as 1 to break down some of the pack sizes. So it's cost of a pack, number of figures, and unit price. So if you look about unit price per figure for 15mm, you've got stuff in the middle is about 50p. Donington New Era, Magister Militum's 50p. I think Essex is 48p in there. You get a few which kind of creep into the slightly more than that, and then you're starting to go down to 40p for museum. Some of them 38p for some of their ones. So sort of a cheapish figure. The really cheap ones are coming in at 30p, 35p a pop, which Outpost surprisingly cheap. Alternative Armies 15mm.co.uk 35p, QRF about 34p. The Corvus Belli new plastic ones in their unit pouches are 31p as well. Lancashire can be 39. What else is there? Round about that sort of mark. Museum Originals 38. So between discounting a couple which are into 60p, you're really talking the difference between the cheapest figures 30p, 31p each, and the most expensive is kind of 50, just to 1. So you're talking whatever that is. I suppose that's 30p base, so it's 40% cheaper, 50p or 30p from the top to the bottom almost of that.
So
that
basically what you're saying is the average HLD army, you're varying in price between 10 and 20 quid.
Because if you say an army is, I think of an army as about 60 quid. So the difference between buying it in the cheapest figures, you might be able to get it for 40, 45, and the expensive one you might be paying 65, 70. So for what we're doing, that's like 20, 25 quid tops.
So I look at it from the perspective of the amount of time I put in painting that, because I'm not exactly the fastest person. If you look value for amount of time, even if I get the most expensive one, I'm going to get a lot more value out of it. You play with it a couple of times in a couple of battles. For me, from when you equate value, it's more than paid for itself, as Adam mentioned earlier, from the the mental aspect of relaxing, painting, and then playing with the damn thing. It's a no-brainer on the cost difference for me on that.
And I guess the question is, why would you not pay another tops 30 quid to have the best possible figures versus paying, saving that 30 quid to have the cheapest possible figures?
First thing I would say is you're assuming the most expensive are the best. That's not
exactly.
Given.
That's a good point. Yeah, very good point. Yeah.
One of the things Tamsin said, which is what made me think for my Ottoman Turks, was the different poses. So Legio Heroica and Essex, as an example, have two poses of the foot.
Yeah.
Guy with gun pointing and guy with pointing up next to his shoulder. So they're particularly uninspiring poses when you're going to do quite a few battle groups. I know that works very nicely for Napoleonics or 7 Years' War type of armies where it's more regimental. One of the things I'd like to do over the last few years is try to make some of the units a bit more
dynamic.
Yeah, dynamic. Good word.
Yeah.
And so when I was looking at museum miniatures, who people know, they're one of my favorite brands. I normally would just buy stuff off them at the January sales. They have one pose, which is quite boring. And then just looking around the different brands, and the thing that made me go through it, and I bought all my Janissaries from QRF, because they had 3 or 4 poses in each of the packets.
Yeah.
Model looked nice enough that I know the quality is not as good as museum, but I had a few different poses. You then add in the Janissary, so I've gone with musket. I've added a few guys with the sword one, so give you that visual of has a gun but also will charge you. It then makes a far more interesting unit rather than 24 guys all holding a bow going pull, which is
the museum thing. But would you have paid a premium for that? Because here you've got this thing that QRF are 34p each and museum are 38p each, or which is literally pennies. It's almost no different. Would you have paid a premium for that, or does the fact it's 4p cheaper make you feel better in some? Do you kind of go yes, and it's cheaper? Is there a sense of finding the cheapest price and thinking that you've thought through and done a spreadsheet and done a deal? Is that actually now part of the hobby, and getting a buzz off thinking I've beaten the pricing algorithm?
No. So I think for me, getting value for money and what would be an enjoyable army that doesn't cost me an inordinate amount of money for something that could be a one-off army, that was the more important part. So
isn't that just saying exactly the same thing though? Because that phrase value for money,
because the cheapest isn't always the value for money. Because I could have bought, there were some armies that were far cheaper, but the models looked horrible. So I looked at a few of them where if you look at the bow, half the bow was falling off or whatever. Yeah. So it's like, okay, I could have saved a few p off QRF or whoever it was.
Yeah. So your project then was working out value for money, and the fact that you think you made a value for money purchase is part of the satisfaction. Whereas Peter, was saying, I want to make a straightforward purchase. And then just get the damn stuff on the table. But that whole process that you spent time on, built a spreadsheet on, you must have got something out of that. And talking about value for money is actually going, is there something in wargamers? Because we're all, we all kind of like spreadsheets and play stats and things like that. And that whole process of working out what value for money is in these little toys, which actually have almost no intrinsic value other than in our own little world. This isn't, I don't know, a car or a pint of beer or a television or something like that that's got a wider context. We want to feel we're getting value for money because perhaps everybody else looks at us, thinks that we're just wasting money on this stuff. So that persuading ourselves we've got value for money might actually be part of justifying the fact that we're playing with toy soldiers.
I think there's a particular weird thing with psychology of historical toy soldier players, historical wargamers that goes on. Because when you look at the concept of what's a fair price, you don't want to feel you're being ripped off. You don't mind paying a fair price.
Yeah.
I think psychologically, and I think it's to do with the history of the hobby, most historical wargamers think a fair price is far lower than where it should be.
I think some historical war gamers think that
I think there's a culture there.
Same as they were paying in 1980.
I think there's a culture there that comes from the history of wargaming, because it started off with buying just airfix, and then people literally making their own. Yep. And then they made their own, which is sort of like the cheapest you can get. And then they made their own and sold them to their friends. So
in fact, there's a great podcast called The Joy of Six that has an interview with the guy from Irregular Miniatures. Who
I listened to that. It's really good.
It's really interesting. Yeah, really nice bloke. So I think you're absolutely right. People started making their own.
And once you get to selling to your friends, then until the 90s, from the 60s, 70s, 80s, until the 90s, selling toy soldier figures wasn't a way to make money. It's something you did as a hobby. You ran a company as a hobby, and you had another job as well. So for decades, toy soldier players got used to the idea that they shouldn't pay very much more than the cost for war games figures. And that was right up into the 90s. And there's at least three of us here that were buying figures then. And everybody else, and everyone that's even come into the hobby since then, has come into that culture of, I actually think wargame figures are too cheap. If I pity the people that are trying to make a living selling 15 mil wargame figures.
I come over from, my first as a kid wargame stuff was doing Games Workshop, some of the first Games Workshop stuff. So all the historical stuff is cheap for me. So I'm like,
and weirdly enough, it was in the 90s with Games Workshop that tried to run it as a company to make money. And their customers weren't historical wargamers. They built a new customer base that got used to used to their pricing. Whereas any historical wargamer or anyone walking into a historical wargames club has got a different view of what a fair price is. And I think historical wargamers set the fair price part too low, which is why they're always scrabbling for, this is cheaper, there's a discount on this, because they think they should be paying less. And I actually think when you look at what they're getting, they should be willing to pay a bit more, actually, because it's kind of cheap. It's not an expensive hobby. And I'm doing 25 mil and I'm doing plastics because it is cheaper, because where I am at, I'm not sure I could always pay £3 for a figure or however much, but it's not a cheap hobby. And the people that think it's cheaper, it's because they're used to not paying a fair price. And they think fair price is lower than it actually what it is. So I think that's always where that pressure of make it cheaper comes from.
So it almost it's a self-fulfilling prophecy from some of the manufacturers still being hobby businesses and not having the cojones to make proper money. Because, because if you look at this, Museum's Z range to me, I think is just a fascinating thing, because that gets raved about, and they are lovely little figures, the new ones that they do, those digital prints, and they bring them out and they are 41p a figure, and in the new year when they do their regular sale they'll be 33p a figure, which is some of the lowest unit cost for some of the best quality figures out there, actually in some of the best material as well. They're in a kind of pewterish metal that is really solid and good and nicely cast. And you're kind of like, why aren't you just charging 10p more? Why didn't you come out and make them all 10p? And you see people like Forged in Battle coming out with a couple of years ago with their nicely presented packs and a huge great range, and just going, bang, this is 50p, but you're buying them in kind of big packets of 24. That's it, and that seems to be going well. And then you've got, you know, Plastic Soldier doing the new plastic stuff that they seem to be kind of, a lot of it seems to be marketed on price, whereas particularly with the Corvus Belli, those are really well beloved and really rated models. And you kind of wonder whether, you know, I don't know, maybe that's a specific thing because that's some of the first plastics to come out in, or plastic equivalent to come out in 15s, whether people would still pay more for those because they're coming in at 30p, roughly 30p a figure, or a bit less if you buy in an army box. But for those figures, do they need to be priced more cheaply to actually sell? You know, or are we actually looking here and saying manufacturers are just shooting themselves in the foot with random pricing that almost, some ways, looks almost independent of quality?
This means war.
I think newer figures are better sculpted, take paint, and take, particularly because I think nowadays everybody uses a lot more inks and things like that. So I think you've got a perception of older manufacturers and older casts and older you know, models and things like that. And I think that comes into it. But I mean, with where I'm concerned, you know, I will make a choice about the best figures historically cast and things like that. So, you know, where all my Macedonian Greek classical figures are Zeiston.
Yeah.
All my Chinese are Essex, because the Chinese Essex figures are really good. And they're the nicest to paint and historically posed. Medieval is a massive area because you need a lot of different types and things like that. So I went with Damien's Donington figures there because he's got a large range and he's got the various different troop types and that. You know, I will look at a certain I mean, I've been looking at doing an African army and wondering about what figures to go. And to be honest, I've been looking at irregular figures there. And I found that, you know, because they do some weird Benin figures, I think they look fantastic for what they are. I will go specifically to a manufacturer based on what they've got. Yeah,
so it's not.
I think the completeness of the range.
Yes,
is important.
Forged in Battle.
I get everything in one place.
Forged in Battle bought out figures for Blemmy and things like that, and they've got some really nice sculpts in there, but they don't have an impetuous infantryman. So I would kind of, I mean, if I'm going to do a specific army for a specific range, I will keep to one range for that army. I don't mix and match ranges, very occasionally, but not really.
Yeah.
I don't have, you know, some knights from Essex with pikemen from some other manufacturer and things like that.
Yeah, I tend to do the same. I generally stick with one manufacturer for an army.
Yes.
But that again, those are sort of other factors.
I might for the bulk of the troops, I might do all one manufacturer, but then get specific character figures for generals' bases and
Is it very different when you go to 25mm though, Tamsin? So I'm interested to understand from your perspective, because we've talked a lot about 15mm. Is it very different when you go to 25, 28mm?
Well, what I've got in 25, 28mm, you've got my World War II armies, forces, and sci-fi, essentially. And there it's a case, well, sci-fi, yeah, Judge Dredd, Strontium Dog. Yep, that's just Warlord Games.
Yeah, there's a limited number of manufacturers. Yeah.
World War II, my Australians were a mix of manufacturers. I think it was about 6 different manufacturers in my World War II Australians.
But did price come into that at all for you, or were you doing a very small collection? So, all right, maybe the other question: why didn't
say
price
it's a
come
small
into it?
collection, but
Just a small collection. Yeah,
it's probably about the size of an ADLG army.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Because in
ADLG army, but
because in 25, 28 mil ancients, there's a massive, variation. You've got the plastic figures, which I think the best price Victrix one comes in at 48p a figure for plastic, for some of their big sets. And then you're looking at, foundry mounted troops. You're getting 3 cavalry for 14 quid, which, count cavalry as 2, is £2.33 for a thing versus the 50p for the plastic. So you've got an enormous disparity between plastic and metal. In fact, maybe looking at this, maybe PSC are making it like bandits with their pricing, but a lot of the 25 mil, 28 mil metals are sort of coming in around the 130, 140, 150, 160 mark. But there's quite a few that are still coming in around £1.10, £1.20, and then some are getting up to £2. So, that 30-40% difference from 15 mils can, in 25 mils, very easily be, in some cases, be 100% difference between, not niche stuff. New Line is absolutely solid. A&A has got some very nice stuff at 116, but Foundry 175, 230. And I think you see a bigger difference in 28 mil because mounted are generally worth more than 2 infantry. I guess horses is just a lot of metal to put into it, and you're starting to get the cost of metal is starting to be a bit more of an issue. But there's a vast disparity here for different types of quality, for people ostensibly offering very, very similar things. The pricing seems to be all over the shop, which is fascinating.
With metals, for horses,
yeah,
there's actually an additional cost which a lot of people don't realise about for some manufacturers, and that's sort of the licensing fee.
Right, some people own horses.
A lot of them use the basic horse sculpts under license from, I think it's eBob Miniatures.
Yeah, eBob's horses. Yeah, no, I've seen that. So there's an extra cost in there as well. But it just seems.
But they all use the same sculpt for horses.
A lot of manufacturers use the same basic sculpts. Yeah.
Wow, I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Sculpting. A lot of people don't like sculpting horses.
Fair enough. Yeah.
No, it's
or fine because getting the horses to look right.
Yeah.
Gripping beast with elongated necks, elongated skinny necks.
Yeah, there's some quite slightly odd ones, isn't there? But it's just so all over the shop in this one. But because you're starting from there's a bigger range in 25 mils, and you're starting from a bigger number. That difference of 20, 30 quid on an army could suddenly become, on this one, could become 100 quid. And
that's completely confused me with 28mm figures.
Yeah,
because it's a whole market I've never ever looked at since I was since I was a 40, near enough 50 years ago. When I was a kid, I bought minifigs, and they were just one manufacturer, and you went to them.
Yeah, and no, there's absolutely all sorts these days, for sure.
Yeah,
so it's just all over the shop. But again, it just seems to be, maybe some of it is VAT registration. I guess that would make a 20% difference for some people, but they seem to, which is quite a lot. But it just seems an odd mix between quality and cost. But I don't know. Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure we even come to any form of conclusion there. I think we've got some of us who are buying stuff for all sorts of different reasons, but some of us are still, even if we don't like to admit it, probably spending more time looking at pricing than is possibly sensible, but possibly that issue about the exercise of looking at pricing as a way of justifying the purchase to yourself You know, if you didn't do the exercise of looking at pricing, the pricing is so all over the shop that maybe you just worry about being ripped off or ripping yourself off or being a mug.
There's an issue with pricing in that Ian Marsh once told me he does fighting 15s, and the cost of producing a figure depends a lot on copyright issues, cost of the metal, marketing, holding stock, and the actual margin for the seller is quite small. So a figure that sells for 60p might make him 6p, for example. Therefore, what looks expensive to your individual wargamer is actually not a huge margin. And bearing in mind that if you're not casting yourself, you've got to keep this stuff in stock and your money's tied up in that until someone decides to buy it.
No, but I'm not sure any of us think that people are making fortunes selling wargaming figures. Possibly just the opposite. Maybe it's almost the opposite. It's maybe the opposite of saying if people are making low margins by casting wargaming figures, and quite a lot of the time we don't think that we're actually price sensitive. We might go through quite a long-winded exercise of looking at pricing, but at the end of that exercise, more often than not, we end up going, I'm just going to buy the ones I like.
I would go with that.
Ooh, shiny, I want that one.
So maybe the exercise of looking at pricing is part of the psychology of buying something that hasn't really got any proper value. In a way,
when I did my
like
last 28mm army, I was just looking more about weight. I was going to get certain key miniatures were going to be metal, but the large units are all going to be plastic because it's just too much hassle to carry around.
Maybe we could all save ourselves a lot of time and effort and spreadsheet bashing and angst if we just bit the bullet and said, let's just buy what we want and we like, and let's ignore this kind of pricing nonsense, because it doesn't actually, it's almost become a game in itself. It's become part of the process.
But I think
that's absolutely true, Tim. But on that note, can you send us a copy of that spreadsheet, please?
Oh God, absolutely. Yeah, that's all going around. Yeah, absolutely. Well, this might save everybody a huge amount of time. Yeah, in an entirely pointless part of the process. Yeah,
I was thinking about as historical wargamers, we could just go, ooh, shiny, I'll buy those ones. But you think of how much effort we all love to go to in choosing an army list, choosing which different troop types and all that, when often it comes down to, like Tim, as you and I have discussed when we've gone to some competitions, it says, why did you bring that army? Well, I just painted it so it looks shiny. Or other times we'd spend hours and hours working out, okay, if I've got this light foot that saves me 4 points, I could put 3 points over here, I can carry this one, versus that's pretty.
Yeah, no, I think actually that's a really good parallel, actually, because the amount of times you can spend tweaking and refining a list, but you're still only going to play 4 or 5 opponents, and that list may or may not, work out or whatever, and it's real marginal gains for a lot of effort. Whereas sometimes you do turn up with, as long as it's half decent and you use it properly, you're going to do okay and have some decent games with it. And maybe it's just actually part of the psychology of, what attracts us all into historical wargaming and list building and all these other things, means that we've almost got a psychological need to go through the pricing exercise, even if by the end of it, we don't actually take any of that information into account. We kind of pretend to ourselves that we have, but quite often we don't. It could be the theory, and I think, as you say, Adam, the issue with some of these manufacturers just underpricing their stuff or having historically low pricing because they're hobby businesses and not being bold enough to put the pricing up. It's become maybe it's the hobby businesses who still got that wargamers mentality, and it's the more professional ones who are bringing stuff out with whizzy packaging and slick marketing and proper graphics.
How do you think it's going to change with the much better 3D printers then? Because you've already seen it with the museum stuff. I've seen it when I went along to Salute. Was it 2 years ago now, there was some amazing sculpts going along with some of the 3D printing stuff, some of the professional stuff. And the stuff that's been developed over the last 2 years for 3D printing is absolutely amazing. If you look in other industries and everything else, as soon as that comes across here, it will totally change the dynamic. You won't be having to do the same sculpts. You could do a lot more dynamic looks because it's a computer file and you can print it. Some of our wargaming colleagues already do it as a part-time business, don't they? And they sell it online and such like. So I think that's going to be the massive change, the big dynamic change in this, because you're not having that same stock held on. If you can then print up some more, as opposed to having to do a spin run of X number of figures and everything else.
I think with 3D printing, you'd be talking for resin printers.
Well, you can do the powdered metal ones now. There's some amazing stuff coming through when you start looking at it.
Honestly, I actually think
powder. For most wargamers are not going to be able to afford the powdered metal.
No. I'm not talking about the wargamers.
The companies.
I'm talking about a manufacturer. So instead of actually going and doing the molds, some of the new stuff coming through. So instead of actually building out the molds and everything else, you'll have your 3D printer, and you'll be able to do a run of figures that you'll then, order some new camels or whatever. But they'll be just run off on demand.
I think 3D printing's a whole other. It's a whole other kettle of fish, and I suspect it's a whole other podcast as well as we creep towards the 2 hour mark. So, but no, I think that will make this already incoherent and messy and potentially actually pointless unless we regard it as part of our own hobby. The act of looking at pricing, this messy pricing matrix, 3D printing's got the opportunity just to hurl all that up in the air, and it depends whether it, I'm sure you could make an argument that it will be good or bad for the hobby manufacturers who are just doing this for fun, or it could be good or bad for the more commercial ones who are trying to make a living out of it with proper margins and stuff. But I think, again, that's probably another subject for another time, and we can draw a line under our somewhat rambling as usual and vaguely incoherent but possibly somewhat enlightening discussion on pricing. Oh, words of spreadsheets, amazing. You've got to love a spreadsheet, haven't you, really? And especially one with different colours on it. But there's only really, I was going to go into the Napoleonic thing there with a red, white and blue link. No, it's all gone horribly wrong. But possibly, I know what we can do. Yes, there's only 3 colours that count when it comes to music. And that is the red, white and blue of the tricolore. And it is time for Andy's quiz music.
Comment les voir? Question. Le trou est sans fond. Question. La légende le dit. Question. Elle dit aussi. Question. C'est une maladie. Question.
So Andy, hit us with a bit of the quiztastic stuff, and then we'll decide whether we think they're good value questions or whether we prefer to pay possibly 10 to 12% less if they were made in a slightly softer, bendier way.
I reckon 10 to 12% less would be a result, to be perfectly honest.
That would probably be a good result, yep.
Right, here we are. So last week it was all about museum pieces. And the questions were, number 1, which foreign dictator's wooden leg is one of the exhibits in the Illinois State Military Museum, having been captured by an Illinois regiment during wartime?
We're not leg.
It's Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, who's the dictator of Mexico.
Okay. But Illinois is the place you keep him.
And caused a war with, which lost him Texas. A man who banned slavery, which caused a war, which lost him Texas.
Something like that. I'm not quite sure of the details, but yes, he was having a siesta when there was a battle in Texas and he lost it.
Well, okay.
It all went a bit embarrassing, right? Number 2, which Napoleonic marshal, related to the heroine of a historic event commemorated in a famous folk song, has his baton as an exhibit in a museum in Armadale on the Isle of Skye?
Got to be MacDonald, hasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. I've actually seen it. Very nice.
You've seen McDonald's baton?
Yeah.
Okay.
So what? The folk songs Old MacDonald had a farm.
Old MacDonald had a core. No, it was the Sky Boat song. He was related to Flora MacDonald of
the margarine fame.
No, she smuggled Bonnie Prince Charlie across when he was being running away from the British.
Okay, all right.
Right. Question 3. Which Union general who was acquitted of killing his lover's wife by pleading temporary insanity commanded a corps at Gettysburg and lost his leg, which is now an exhibit in the Smithsonian Museum?
There was loads of them lost legs in the.
There was Sykes, wasn't it?
No, it was Sickles.
Sickles, that's this one.
Yeah, that's right.
Sickles, sick leg. Okay, fantastic.
Question. Comment les voir? Question. Le trou est sans fond? Question. La légende le dit? Question. Elle dit aussi? Question. C'est une maladie? Question.
Right then, well, hit us this week with next week's questions then, Andy.
Right, so this week's
question with next week's questions? Yes, possibly one of the two. Your choice.
Yeah, well, I know what you mean, right? So this week's theme is martial law. Right, which French marshal in the Napoleonic Wars was shot by Napoleon at a hunting party for which Berthier got the blame?
Was that when they were shooting the rabbits?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that story.
Right, so you know the answer then. Number 2, which marshal's opinion of the strategic significance of the watershed of France was, quote, if I stand here and take a piss, half of it will go into the Atlantic and half of it will go into the Mediterranean, right? And number 3, which marshal once sent a message stating, my centre is giving way, my right is retreating, situation excellent, I'm attacking?
I've heard that one before.
I think I may have heard that one. I'm not sure I know the answer, but I think it's fantastic, Andy, and good to sneak in a question about taking the piss as well, which is all good.
Comment les voir? Question. Le trou est sans fond? Question. La légende le dit? Question. Elle dit aussi? Question. C'est une maladie? Question.
Right. Well, with time cracking on, then just a very, very quick round robin to see what's coming this week. Peter, I'm guessing you're planning more sleep, more rest, and hopefully a full recovery.
Yeah.
Done.
Very simple. I might do some cavalry horses because I can spray them black.
Spray them black.
Not gold?
Right. Yeah, not gold. Not gold this time. Mr. Saunders, are you going to press the button on an order this week?
Once I've got an email back from North Star or Crusader Miniatures, whoever they are, I'll definitely end up putting some in, I think.
And are you going to worry less?
I might change my mind.
You're going to worry less about the pricing now that you just realised that it's actually a pointless exercise.
There's so many things to worry about. Weight, will I ever use them? This is
Pricing's way down the list.
Also, congratulations on not electrocuting yourself with the flocking
It never
device.
showed up. I've just had to send an email through eBay saying, "Where's my flocker?"
Right. Yes. Yeah, I think I've seen that BBC Two play. Adam,
money back.
Yes,
I almost pressed the refund button.
Right. Yeah. Is that on the flocker? No. Adam, what are you doing this week? Is it you've glued the Dacians? Are you going to bold out the undercoating?
Well, I've got the first batch of 30 already undercoated, and I'm concentrating on getting that batch 30 undercoat before we first start painting the first batch. So I've got some in reserve in case the weather goes wrong. So just grinding on with the Dacians.
What colour did you do the undercoat? Black, white, brown?
White. White, because
get some pingy colours on them. Get them, otherwise they get toned down a bit. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Simon, what about you? What's on the shopping list this week?
So I've ordered all the Ottoman Turks, so hopefully they'll arrive in the next couple of weeks, which will be good. Give me something to work through on over Christmas. So my focus for the next couple of weeks is more rats for Dragon Rampant.
Okay. Tamsin, are there rats in the world of... Well, it's still 2000 AD in your backdrop, although we've been talking Romans for a while.
Yeah. No, finally the cobblestone figures have hit the paint table.
Ah, great.
I haven't seen paint yet, but they will tomorrow.
Right. Okay. So there's going to be some top quality Judge Dredd action in the next few weeks then. Great. And Andy, what about you?
Finishing off the Thracians and the Voyniks, and then probably making a start in those Italian ships with the barber poles.
Barber pole frontage, fine. And I think for me, again, much the same. It will be, can I finish the damn Arabs? I think I'm down to 4 bases now that really need some swordsmen and some medium spearmen that just need to be done. And there's a bit of stuff about painting belts, which is really awkward on the 28mm plastic figures because they're not particularly well defined. And you end up having to go over the cloth bits either side again, which is a bit of a but I will bite the bullet and get those done. And maybe if with a bit of good weather, bit of outside matte varnishing, there will be some Arabs done and dusted, as long as I don't get distracted by any more rebasing projects or anything like that. So
is that when you realise that you then want some Naffertons and a couple of else to sort of like round it all out?
I've actually got the Nafferton already. I had them for Saga, and I've got some special bases that I can drop the Saga things into to turn them into ADLG size bases that I had ages and ages ago. But so I've avoided that. I've managed to save some money. How about that? It's probably cost me more to do than it would do to buy the figures twice, but it's all done and dusted. So that's the plan, and that's this week. Thank you again, everybody, and goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Adam, you've got a theory. I think last time we did this, you came out with a theory quite early, and it was a really good one. And it kind of was like, right, you might have answered this, which was kind of a bit tricky. Saunders, we're about to start.
Can you hear me?
Oh, we can, yeah, indeed. Your iPad's going.
Yeah, we can hear.
Oh, we hear you.
I updated my Mac software to Big Sur, so I think that may have something to do with it.